Recording in progress.
I'll call the committee of the whole for, what is today? October the 4th to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Olson.
Here.
Alderman Hofer.
Here.
Alderman Mayer.
Here.
Alderwoman Wilhelm is not present. Alderwoman Hanneman.
Here.
Alderman Barber.
Here.
Alderman Nelson.
Here. We have a quorum. Please rise, join the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Schmutz on the wall. There is no citizens' comment in the committee of the whole. We move on to item B, which is consideration of resolution adopting the City of Franklin Code of Conduct for elected and appointed officials and rules of common council. Madam Director of Administration.
Good evening, everyone. What we're talking about tonight is the draft Code of Conduct and Rules of the Common Council. We've been talking about this for quite some time. I believe this is our 8th meeting on the topic, as well as all of the individual meetings that I had with the majority of you to make sure we got the documents to where they were workable documents that were functioning for the council. I did go through all of the updates we've done, all of the versions we've done, and I believe all of the updates requested are in the documents that you have in front of you tonight. I thought maybe we could start by just walking through, because on September 7th, there were quite a few requests that we do some looking at. And so I thought maybe if we could just start with those, and I'm just reading now off the council action sheet. When we're done with this, I can go into the document and show you those changes. But basically, there were 7 items that were requested. The first one was to review and clarify the voting procedures with regard to appointing new members as well as breaking ties.
Before you do that, can we back up and discuss the purpose of this that's outlined on on sentence number 1 of your background?
Sure.
And then go back into it?
Absolutely. So just to give you a little bit of the background again, this was initiated out of an employee complaint that came to the city, came to HR in early 2021. We did work with our insurance company because of the liability that was upon the city when that complaint came in. City's insurance provider did take the case on, and they hired an attorney from Crivello Carlson, Attorney Nelson from Crivello Carlson, and she did a very thorough investigation and made some recommendations to the council. And in those recommendations, it was just to make sure that we're creating proper, respectful, and effective communication protocols and initiating leadership improvements. So that's kind of the backdrop of this. But what I will also tell you is these rules and conduct, code of conducts are not, they're very common in the public sector, and a lot of communities have them, a lot for the same reasons we do, but basically just so that there's clear expectations on what that protocol looks like as far as proper communications. So back then, if I could go through the items that were requested, there were 7 items requested at the September 7th meeting. The first one had to do with breaking ties, the presiding officer breaking ties, as well as the process for common council to go through when there was a vacation of a council seat in between elections. So that first item, and I'll just give you a little bit of a background on that. The municipal code says that we follow Robert's Rules of Orders unless if there is specific documentation that we do not. So on that breaking ties issue, Section 5N, I took that right out of Robert's Rules of Orders, the most recent version, and it basically states that the presiding officer can but is not obligated to vote whenever his or her vote will affect the result. That is, he or she can vote to either break the tie or cause a tie, or in a case where there's a 2/3 vote required, he or she can either vote to cause or to block the attainment of the necessary 2/3 vote. So that I don't believe requires any changes because that's our normal protocol.
And we learn something new every day. Alderman Mayor.
Go through everything and then we add, or should I add something that might pertain to this at this point?
Yeah, I think you can jump in when we're on it.
Okay, the abstention rule, this seems to directly contradict that as a double standard. Who's ever sitting in the center seat can choose to abstain, choose to vote, choose to break a tie, choose to cause a tie, choose to block the attainment of the necessary votes. That's kind of exactly the argument that was being used about the abstention for the council, that someone could be involved with the discussion and at the last minute abstain because they feel it's necessary based on the discussion. It's kind of the same thing there for Section 5 with the who's ever sitting in the center seat as mayor, now or in the future, whenever. It seems to directly contradict that. And I'm not a real heavily sold on the abstention thing. I have abstained when it's been in conflict with my job and things, but it's just that those two things conflict, set a double standard as far as I can see. And that's listed several times in the, I think 3 times, that the mayor or presiding officer can do exactly as you described, cause the change in the vote.
So that's the rule of the presiding officer. And if we go back to the abstention, I think that perhaps is a little bit different because if you remember the discussion we were having around that abstention was if there was a conflict, no problem. If a conflict arose during the conversation, again, no problem. It would just be somebody who chooses to participate in debate and then chooses not to vote. But remember, we just changed that to is discouraged from abstaining. So they certainly can, and I would say that would be the same right as the chair has. They can vote or not vote, but the presiding officer does not vote if there's no effect on the outcome. That's what Robert's Rule of Order say. So I guess I'm not sure where you're talking about the double standard. There are rules established for the chair and there's rules established for the body. So I'm not exactly sure what the double standard is.
Well, it just seems like the chair, presiding officer, whoever it might be, can sit through the entire discussion and we won't know if they're going to vote or not vote until the vote comes up. That's the same for a council member. And in the end, the council member can abstain at the last minute based on the discussion when they feel that it's necessary, but it's strongly discouraged on that side, whereas on this side, it just is a fact.
So are you suggesting a change?
Yeah, probably mostly in the verbiage for the abstention. A member who wishes to abstain must do so in accordance with the City Franklin Code, and on. But a member who participates in debate but does not voice that he or she is abstaining due to a conflict is discouraged from abstaining from the vote. I don't know if that needs to be even in there. If we say something that as soon as a member understands or realizes that they're not going to take part in the vote, they should abstain, but this makes it seem like they are really doing a wrong thing if they take part in the discussion, when the discussion itself might be when the person realizes that they should abstain.
Well, that one's actually covered in the sentence before that. So it would just really be if somebody just participates in discussion and just simply chooses not to, because I'm assuming if a conflict comes up, whoever has the conflict would mention that.
When you know that, but it might be when the vote comes up,
And then you would mention it at that point,
or just abstain.
or just abstain. Yep.
Okay, if I'm the only one that has that concern, then
Presiding officer voting is different than a council member abstaining, and whenever a much earlier draft was there, my recollection is that I had issues and raised issues with it because I believe it said must abstain or shall not abstain or something. And then that got
It was more
tweaked
strongly
to
worded.
discouraged. But I understand exactly where you're coming from. A council member may choose to abstain, even if there's not a conflict.
Yeah.
Thank you. Also on Section 5N on the breaking ties out of Robert's Rules of Order, can you clarify, or does Robert's Rules clarify, if the presiding officer chooses to vote to cause a tie, then what happens to the question? Is it automatically failed?
So it's interesting that you ask. So a tie vote is not a pass, right? So it depends in the context in which the question is asked. So the clerk and I were having that discussion on Friday before we put the packet out, just to make sure we were clear. But yes, it basically, if it was like let's just say it was 3-2 in favor of something, and the mayor voted, it would be 3-3, fails on lack of majority. And city attorney, please step in, because this is definitely his thing.
Anybody else see an issue with that?
So, just so, Mr. City Attorney, so you're clear and you're comfortable with the verbiage that's been presented tonight, then? I'm going to put you on the spot, but I'm just kind of looking for, I know we're all kind of trying to say the same thing, but I just want to make sure that it's clear, because
Yeah, I'll just say it for you. You don't want the mayor to vote.
No, I'm not.
You want no control of the mayor.
I just want it to be the same standard that the mayor who's ever sitting in that council.
Well, but your scenario deals with abstention of an alderman to affect an outcome.
Exactly.
Same as what they're-
And that's an active activity, sorry, best I can do, to affect an outcome that may or may not be, whereas if the presiding officer chooses to vote to affect the outcome, that's the responsibility of the chair. Now, I'll grant you that voting to cause a tie is a bit radical. But then there's always the veto. So 6 of one, half dozen the other.
Well, veto's more forthcoming, more out in the open, more transparent. You can either vote either to break or to cause a tie. Or in the case of where there's 2/3 vote is required, he or she can vote to either cause or block the attainment of the necessary 2/3 vote. When you yourself say that it's the council's decision 99% of the time, and then if you choose to use your veto, that's fine. That's another part of the process, but this just seems kind of not exactly up on the table.
Well, it's just like abstaining so that there is no vote. And I'm arguing for this, not for me.
Yeah, I get
I'm
that.
arguing this for the position. This is important stuff for the mayor's office and the chair. Every time there's an erosion of the authority of the office,
Right,
that impacts not just me, but the future of the city. So that's why I'm arguing this.
but you do still retain the veto power.
That's correct. But then the motion has to pass. What happens if there was a motion to
I
deny?
have no issue with you breaking a tie. That's perfectly logical.
And that's what this is.
That's not all this is, though.
Well,
It's not all this is.
I said it earlier. You learn something new every day. If
I was
this
gonna
was
say-
not an issue, it would not have been an issue. I would not have known this. Now I know it.
And all I did, I didn't
I know, I
create
get
this.
it. I
All I
get
did was
Alderman
read it in
Nelson's
the
got the
book.
floor.
thank you, Mayor. Well, the points that I was bringing up and looking at for clarification was not to lessen or eliminate the mayor's position to do anything. Yet, I was just kind of accused of that, but that's not my point. It's not my game here. I have never abstained in any vote in 4.5, almost 5. I vote yes, I vote no. I don't miss meetings. I missed one from a heart attack. And I think it's very important that it's very direct. I don't play games with abstentions. I just wanted clarification on where this goes. I yield.
City Attorney, then Alderman Hanneman.
With regard to the mayoral vote, that is pure in the Wisconsin statutes for cities. It's been there for years and years and years.
I got to take my statutes to bed. Alderwoman Hanneman.
And I think that leads into the point that I wanted to make. And while I certainly appreciate what you're saying on this matter, it is laid out in Robert's rules. And we are an organization that binds ourselves to Robert's rules in the way we're doing our business. So I don't know that it necessarily behooves us to be able to go and pick and choose what we do and don't like from that document. And if it's outlined that way within the state statutes and Robert's rules, I kind of think we have to live with it. But I do understand and appreciate your point on that.
Okay.
So the next item would be a new section 14 that's being suggested, which is the clarification, the review and clarification of how the council appoints a council member due to a vacation of a council seat between elections. There are two statutes that directly speak to this. State statutes section 1723 as well as 1988 talks about no secret ballots. So I just want to be clear that as we go in that document, when we go back to the document and we talk about it in the rules, that part is statutory, right? So we have to, section 1723 says vacancies in offices of mayor or alderperson, cities operating under the general law or special charter may be filled by the common council by majority vote, appointing a successor to serve for the residue, and they use the word residue, of the unexpired term, or until a special election is held or is ordered by common council under another section, or an office may remain vacant until the election is held. So that's in state statute as well as the secret ballot. Everything after that, where it starts with in accordance with state statutes, that's Franklin's process. That's the process that I'm told has been used a number of times, including last month when the council wanted to seat a new council member. So basically issuing and publishing a notice to residents of the vacancy, accepting the letters of interest, inviting all interesting parties to the meeting so that they may make a presentation to the common council, then the council appoints by majority vote. Then the appointment is complete once the result of the sufficient vote is ascertained and announced, and no resolution is required. And once appointed, the body may not rescind or reconsider. The process is used when council determines that it wants to fill a vacancy. If it was maybe 45 or 60 days before election, or maybe even 90 days, the council may have a different decision. But that second part is simply talking about what the procedure is. I think that was the request that we received from the elder person who made it, was to document what the process was. So that was the documentation of that process.
City Attorney.
On this one, I had recommended deleting everything that Administrator Steno cited as the Franklin process, because I know the council decided to, okay, let's solicit potential candidates and let's publish a notice. Council decided that. What's provided under the statutes is that the council decides whether and how it's going to fill a vacancy. So my thought was, never predict the future, never predict conditions and facts and what future council members may think or prefer. And so I just thought reference the couple of statutes, leave it at that, unless you want to leave this process in, but a future council to fill a vacancy then would have to look at the code, and if they were not happy with that,
No, this isn't code.
rules or what.
All right, I'll fix this.
Well, anyway, my point was, it's up to the council. You can leave it in, and it could be changed. But I just wanted to make the point that that is not a required under the statutes process, and that's just what was done on this last go-round.
All right, so the council got a choice, leave it alone or make the following suggested change. City of Franklin has utilized the following process.
We can certainly do what
Or
both
leave
the
it-
mayor and the attorney are saying. What we were requested at the last meeting was staff was requested to bring back what the process is, to document the process so everyone was clear on it. Again, if council chooses to change it in the future, that's not a problem, but the request was they wanted it documented so that everybody was clear on what the process was.
Alderman Hammond.
And my point was akin to the mayor's on that one. I think it's good to keep it in there. Who knows how long down the road it'll be before this issue comes up again, and maybe none of us will be here and remember how it was done in the past. So I do like keeping it in and saying something along the lines of City of Franklin or the Common Council has utilized this process or historically used the following process, but something to say that they're not bound to this, but this is what has been sort of set the precedent.
I agree with that. Kind of a hybrid in between that last point you made about not bound to that. Maybe, however, the council does have the option to alter this or something based on needs. Somewhere in between there, I'm fine with.
Alderman Holford.
So in my experience, no document has ever been created that's going to cover all circumstances for all time. So I kind of view this as what I would call a living document that you can change as needed. I guess my immediate question would be, in the event that the council had to fill a future position, is there a time limit or minimum in advance of doing that a council could change those rules? Or could they say, hey, we have a position to fill, let's change the rules? You follow what I'm?
Yep, absolutely. So an amendment to the rules is a simple majority. And then, but if you wanted to just make a decision on the spot to suspend the rules, it would be a 2/3 vote.
So if it was left as is, it's not hamstringing future council?
That would be correct.
Thank you.
Only that if the subject matter of filling a vacancy came up, somebody could request a copy of this code or rules, whatever it's called, to go on the same agenda. And then you address that first, and then you address the fill a vacancy item.
And hear ye, all heed to the alderman of the 5th District, Alderman Barber, who's been neglected.
Since the beginning. Anyway, I was happy with the process we had last time. I think it went well, it flowed well. I liked the components of it. I have no problem with the language as is. If you want to change it to keep it more open-ended, I don't have a problem with that. But I do think that it has to be open-ended for future council as well, and it is subject to change. So I could go either way with it, but I was happy with the process that we did engage in last time.
This is your document, but might as well make the small change.
So if the change is going to happen, it would be the City of Franklin has utilized the following process to fill council vacancies, and then, of course, all that information. And then I guess I would suggest maybe the last sentence where we say this process is utilized when the council determines, we could just say this process may be utilized. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point as well.
Any objections to either of those? Any suggestions, Alderman Mayor?
Also like the
So the next item was just a request to review the charter ordinances to determine applicability of those ordinances to these documents. Staff, city attorney, and myself reviewed the charter ordinances and did not find any information applicable to the code of conduct or the rules, so there was no changes required due to that. The next one was just reviewing and clarifying the duties of the council president. So what I did is basically went through everything in municipal code that referred to acting, acting mayor, presiding officer, council president. We were just trying to come up with as many as we could. I found those three sections, 19.2C, which talked, and then 19.3B, as well as 33.1C, and none of them are in conflict with each other. They're all in the code already, so unless if you believe there needs to be a clarification, I think those clarify the situation. They kind of are. If there's nothing on that one, number 4 was a question to review and clarify the mayor's participation in debate. I again reviewed Chapter 19, council proceedings of the municipal code, and it basically says it exactly says participation in debate. The presiding officer may speak upon any question. I think that clarifies that one, again, unless if there's any questions. Number 5 was to add aldermanic notice of important safety matters. We did review the current version, which had some information in that we had already added through one of our iterations. I just changed that as a suggestion to be out of courtesy to all council members, and then the add was important safety matters as determined by the mayor will be communicated to the council members as soon as practicable once they become available and known. And then it goes on to talk about, in addition, new information regarding appropriate city business and communications will be disseminated to the body prior to disseminating on social media. That was something we had agreed on prior. There's nothing on that one. There was a request as well at the last meeting on the 21st to talk, or on the 7th, to consult with legal counsel. That was appointed by the city's insurance provider to obtain an opinion regarding whether the draft code of conducts and rules of the common council satisfy council's expectation and the insurance requirement, the requirements of the insurance company. I did contact Attorney Nelson at Gravello Carlson. I provided every piece of documentation that we have on this matter from the time it was introduced in April of 2021 until last week. After a couple-hour discussion, I think a 3-hour discussion, just making sure she understood everything that we were doing. She said she fully agreed with the documents as they relate to the matter she investigated earlier this year. She did make a comment specifically, and she wanted me to pass this on to you, that these documents simply put into written format what the law and the city's organizational structure dictate in regard to resolution of the matter. So she read this document as well, so she was on board with that.
Alderman Barber.
One of the things that we discussed when we carried this over to this meeting tonight is to have our new aldermen have sufficient time to look it over and understand it, and because we'd be asking you to vote on it. So I'm just wondering if you've had enough time to look at it to make an educated vote or make a vote on it. And do you have any questions of us as to how it came into being?
Get the mayor's attention. Oh, it's on. Okay, never mind. Thank you for bringing that up. I did want to thank fellow members of the council for making sure I did have the opportunity to have not only the time to read it, but the opportunity to provide input. I greatly appreciate that. I also appreciate and respect the work that you put into it, the effort and the input. I think it's basically a pretty nice document. I had opportunity to read it. I had the opportunity to sit down with the administrator and ask questions, get clarification. Without going into a great deal of detail, I asked for the genesis or the history behind it, so I've got that and I understand it. In reviewing it, it's something that I'm comfortable with and I will be prepared to vote.
Then I'd like to make a motion to approve. No. So We'll just carry it over till tomorrow.
I'm not sure if this is the right time, but I'll throw it out there and Peggy can tell me if it is or not. I'm fine with everything in here. Just one thing I want to put up for discussion, the appendix. To me, appendixes don't always get the same respect that the document gets. But in this, the appendix is the ethics code, the ethics state code, and it's Appendix A. To me, this should be in part of the document as maybe a Section 9. No other changes really need to be made, just that I think it should be part of the document rather than an appendix, and I'm just throwing that one out there for discussion. It is page 12, or 17 of tonight's document, right, or 12 of the document? 12 or 17, ethics. It comes after the whole document and after the acknowledgement and whatnot. But it's the ethics part. And I think it should just be in the document. What's that? Attachment A, correct. I think instead of an attachment, it should be in the body. Just throwing that out there for discussion as a Section 9 or whatever section we choose.
So that's the way it started, and the council asked me to move it to an appendix because
What
it was,
council?
West Dallas.
maybe. So the discussion was because the different things that are in Section 8, the enforcement of the code would not apply to the
I understand
ethics.
that.
That's kind of why we put it separate, but we could put it as Section 9,
That's
perhaps.
kind of what I said, Section 9, yeah. If that's acceptable to the rest of the body. Somehow, I think it should be part of the body of the document rather than an attachment, a second thought, so to speak.
We're good.
My thought is, by it being an attachment, it receives more emphasis or focus as opposed to being part of the body. That's just my thought on it.
Alderman Nelson.
Is there, and I agree with Alderman Mayor, because I'd like to see it as part of the whole document. It's kind of like your junior varsity parochial team versus Division I, because as you go, no offense to the junior varsity parochial guy next to me, but I think it's a big, very important piece of this. It put, hopefully, it put together kind of where we were wanting to go, and I was pretty happy with how this was laid out. And if it could be item 9 or part 9, how we want to do it, I think that's where it would become more of the actual documents, kind of a home.
Any objections to that? Okay. Mr. City Attorney.
Looking at the draft, I think it would be Section 8.
Well, it can't be Section 8, technically. That's where it used to be. That's where it started a couple months ago. But the reason we took it out of Section 8 and put it in the back was because the enforcement of this code of conduct doesn't apply to the ethics. That has its own enforcement. So that's why I think Section 9 would be,
But there is no section after Section 7 in my packet.
there should be a Section 8.
Page 13.
Okay, so the ethics is attachment in my packet. Attachment A is on page 17, which follows page 16. Page 16 is an acknowledgement. And page 15 ends with a section 7.
Number 7 of Section 8. So go back to page 13 on the packet, and you'll see a header that says Section 8 Enforcement of this code.
Okay. Never mind.
One other option you might think about is putting it way at the beginning as maybe a preface or something, and then to disassociate it with what's gonna, with the sections that are enforceable by the council. Either section 9 by itself, or maybe a section,
Section 9.
okay. I'm
How
good with
about Section 9, and then what we can do in the title is add and Code of Ethics.
Okay, good.
So that it identifies both, so somebody doesn't lose it right at the beginning, and then we don't have to worry about the conflict with the
That's good.
sanctions in 8.
Yep,
And
that
then,
puts it at the beginning, and, yep, good.
Now, somebody on that side was talking before we all jumped on. Are you finished, Alderman Barber, Mr. JV? This is one JV guy who went on both sides of the football, so, you know, we got a whole lot of shade coming from the 6th districts. But, okay. Anybody else on this matter? Is there a motion to adjourn? We'll do Barber and Nelson. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.